Hello, this is Robert Watkins from the Center on Conflict, Development and Peace Building at the Geneva Graduate Institute. The subject of this episode of the CCDP Spotlight is the changing nature of conflicts and challenges to mediators. My guest today is David Harland, Executive Director of the Center for Human Dialogue, commonly known as HD, here in Geneva. Just a few words about David. He's a former UN official who's worked in Bosnia, Kosovo, Haiti, and Timor-Leste, and has served as a witness for the prosecution for a number of cases at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. He's been executive director at HD since April 2011. And for those of you who are not familiar with the center, it's a Swiss-based non-profit organization created by the ICRC more than 20 years ago and is now considered one of the leading international private diplomacy organizations working to prevent and resolve armed conflicts through dialogue and mediation. HD is known for its global reach, innovative mediation processes, multi-track methods, and extensive networks, and especially for its discreet approach. David, let me start off with a question about the way in which HD works. HD may be one of the most important international private diplomacy organizations that no one has ever heard of. Why all the secrecy?
Well, hi, Robert. It's great to be here. No, not that secret. I mean, I'm here talking with you, and I'm really happy about that. But yeah, the path from war to peace often requires, space for a confidential discussion. If we spend years speaking to the government of Spain and ETA about whether or not ETA would cease its campaign of armed violence and so on. And that's a conversation that could not take place in public view. That's a conversation which each side would have had to deny. Contact with ETA was against the law in Spain, and ETA was committed to an armed struggle which would accept no compromise. So when the time has come to talk, HD provides that space. And when that has to be confidential, so be it.
Okay. So it's a little bit like the way in which the ICRC works, and when it's doing mediation with armed groups that are impacting their access to populations that they're trying to help. Would that be?
Absolutely, yeah. I wouldn't overstate the confidentiality. Exactly. Many. You mentioned the ICRC, but frankly, all doctors too operate that way. The organization is not secret, but we provide a cone of confidentiality for those who need it. And in armed conflict, when the parties are looking for a path out of violence, there's often something sacrilegious about taking the first step. And we offer them a safe space within which to do that, where there is no pressure of time, there is not pressure of publicity, and they're free of security concerns. And it's when you have that space that the most creative ideas can come into play.
Mm-hmm. Given the way in which conflicts these days are moving from international conflict between countries and more conflict within countries, there seems to be a consensus amongst mediators that in this multipolar world, that track one mediation, i.e. between governments, has lost its significance as a conflict resolution tool. Do you believe that to be true? And is that contributing to a bigger role for private mediation organizations like HD?
Well, first of all, I think that interstate warfare, international warfare, is making a comeback. That actually it's been largely gone from the international system for a very long time, for at least a generation. But now, most obviously with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but also with other situations in the Middle East and elsewhere, and in East Asia, between also China and America, which is, of course, not yet an armed conflict, but perhaps not very far away from it. There is a return to interstate tension that hasn't been there. And you mentioned multipolarity, and exactly that's the basic driver of it. So that's an issue, and I think the passing of the U.S. unipolar moment, whether or not you liked it, is associated with a rise in interstate tension and in violence that needs to be managed. Traditional diplomacy is finding it more and more difficult for a number of reasons, including technology, social media, the demands of publics for full transparency. So yes, I would say tensions are rising, and the capacity of traditional diplomacy to manage those tensions is much reduced. And yes, that creates a certain space for organizations like HD. I should say there are also other actors moving into that space. Bill Burns of the CIA gave a speech at Ditchley Park a while ago, in which with the title, I think, of Intelligence Diplomacy, talking about the growing role of the intelligence community in conducting diplomatic talks that would normally have been conducted by foreign ministries. In the United Nations, the Security Council is blocked, and so there's very little room sometimes for the Department of Political and Peacekeeping Affairs. So a lot of the mediation has sort of shifted to the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. So I would say, yeah, traditional diplomacy is finding it hard to deal with the current challenges. And so a variety of actors are moving in to fill the void, quite imperfectly, I should say.
Mm-hmm. Imperfectly because they have different end goals in mind, or they don't have the capability or training, or for what reasons?
I think traditional diplomacy, evolved, starting in the West over, 400 years, and developed a whole lot of, professional apparatus and the political structure that allowed it to work. And, the other forms of diplomacy all have significant problems of their own. I mean, just, to take Bill Burns and his intelligence diplomacy, in that realm, and in the realm of private diplomacy too, you often don't really know who you're speaking to, and that has to be discovered. In regular diplomacy, people know who their interlocutors are, and they know what their mandates are, and they know what their authorities are. The United Kingdom Intelligence Service identified a guy, some time ago, who said that he was Mullah Mansour, then one of the leaders of the Afghan Taliban. The Americans and the Brits flew him to Kabul and met with then President Karzai, and it turned out that actually he was a shopkeeper from Quetta. And we haven't had any quite that bad, but Robert, I do have to tell you, that's just one example. In our talks with ETA, which I'm allowed to talk about now because Prime Minister Zapatero is doing a Netflix show on it, we were in the same room as the head of ETA for years in a round of talks, and we didn't know who he was or what role he had. And there are a whole lot of other problems. I mean, we as a little creature like HD, we have no carrots and sticks, but carrots and sticks are the diplomacy, are the currency of power diplomacy. So there is a decline of traditional diplomacy. There is a range of actors coming to fill the gap, but each of them has problems of their own, very much including little HD.
And would you say the main problem that they have is that they don't have that depth of knowledge and experience of the interlocutors that they're engaging with?
No. Actually, often they have greater knowledge. In HD, as with, by the way, not saying HD is the only actor in this space. In Rome, there are the community of Sant'Egidio, and, there are Intermediate in London, and there are others. But we often operate multi-level mediation processes. So there is a national ceasefire in Libya. There has been almost no fighting in Libya since that agreement was made in my office in August of 2020. That is right at the height of the pandemic. And I think what allowed us to get to that point is that, unlike a regular diplomatic service, which is engaging mainly at the intergovernmental level, we were also engaging local elites, including, Marshal Haftar and Fayez Siraj on the other side, and Aguila Saleh and the principal actors, and then also the notables and the public at a level below that. So I would say the private actors have some advantages in terms of depth of knowledge, but they are light mediators usually. They, in the technical sense, that is, they have no carrots and sticks to bring to bear. So they have to find deals that are exactly equally poised. I always remember the Milan Kundera book that in English is called The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I thought that we could write an HD autobiography called The Unbearableness of Being Light, because the absence of carrots and sticks and the lack of a formal status is a problem. So an organization like HD, we've spent a lot of time over the last year or two working on these Russia-Ukraine grain deals, which was originally a project in HD. We needed partners with carrots and sticks, and finding which one that can be and engaging them can be a painful business.
So maybe your niche is then playing that role of getting talks started, perhaps with characters that those powers that have the carrots and sticks do not want to be seen to be discussing with. You can get those talks going, and once they reach a certain level, you can pass it over to those people.
No, very much. I think that I can't speak for the other actors, particularly in the intelligence and humanitarian community, but in our little world of non-governmental actors, that's absolutely right. We are at our maximum value added when we're engaging with parties who are not yet kosher, who nobody can be seen to be interacting with. And I think we can bring first contact. We can also bring ideas. We can also bring the first mediators. So, one of the others we were involved with was it was very hard to find a mediator acceptable both to the government of Ethiopia and to the Eritreans, to the Tigrayans during the recent conflict there. And several were tried, and different intergovernmental, governmental organizations put different mediators into play. And we, after consultation with the parties, felt that perhaps former President Obasanjo of Nigeria might be able to get a mediation going. And that happened. But once it was moving, it then became important that other weightier parties took over the mediation process.
Could you sometimes be seen by the people that you're negotiating with as being instrumentalized by some of those powers with the carrots and sticks, and then thus creating a suspicion about your intentions?
Yeah, that's one of many risks. Or that we are seen by the other party simply as a useful idiot, and of course, many parties engage the other party, essentially for intelligence gathering purposes. They want to speak to them to sort of understand how they make decisions and to understand
who their decision makers are.
Who their decision makers are and so on. So the risk of being instrumentalized by the parties, or in fact by other third parties, is extremely high. It's a minefield, Robert.
Or at least being perceived to be instrumentalized. Whether you actually are or not is not necessarily the case.
That's right. You started with a comment about secrecy. One of the reasons we're not the organization is not secret. We have a website, and
I found you on the web.
Yeah. But one of the reasons we keep a low profile, in fact, is that a lot of the capacity of the parties to gain leverage by creating negative perceptions about third parties or other stakeholders in the talks is reduced when those parties have no profile anyway.
Yeah.
So, if there was a colossal leak in a process between the government of Turkey and the PKK about a decade ago, and no particular opprobrium fell onto the third party that was organizing those talks, because nobody really seemed to know or care who they were.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how we like it.
It's good to be insignificant.
Yeah,
I guess.
it's good to be a mosquito.
But just following up on that question, the UN Secretary General has advocated for a surge in diplomacy for peace. But Lakhdar Brahimi, one of the biggies in the mediation world, is quoted as saying that he points to Afghanistan and South Sudan as examples of overcrowding. That is, that there's a profusion of well-meaning special envoys and NGOs that have a willingness to try to mediate or to try to break into there. And others even question the activities of some of the NGOs pretending to do this track to mediation, but that start with advocating for one particular side or perhaps have their own agenda in the dispute. Is that a fair assessment? And how is taking sides affecting the independence of private mediation organizations like HD?
Well, on the overcrowding issue, I have to say, I don't feel it very strongly. In the type of work we do, whether it's ETA or ISIS or Libya or any of the parties we deal with, when there are other parties who are engaged, other third parties who are engaging the belligerents in talks, normally we find a way to work with them, whether they're official actors or unofficial actors. And, even a bit of competition is not always a bad thing. HD secured the first ceasefire between the government of Indonesia and the Aceh rebels during the Aceh War in 2002. But then, Mati Ahtisaari was quicker off the mark when the tsunami changed the power balance and created an opportunity. And, frankly, that was probably a good thing. That they were able to make a bigger, stronger, deeper agreement, the Helsinki Agreement. So I don't find... there are a lot of people who say they are doing mediation, and it's just factually not correct. But the relatively small group of people, official and unofficial, who are actually conducting processes between belligerents is small, and we get on reasonably well.
So long as each other knows what the other is doing. And I think that what Brahimi was saying is that when he's leading a mediation process, he discovers that there are these back channels where mediation is being undertaken, and he's not necessarily aware of it, and that weakens his position as the person who has been designated by the international community as leading the mediation. I think that's what he was getting.
Where there is a lead mediator, whether it's a mandated one by the United Nations or by a regional organization or by some other body, our view, and I think the view of others who, operate in this world, is you follow the lead mediator. But until there is a lead mediator, or until there is a viable process, a certain amount of entrepreneurial probing and figuring out what can be done and what might work is not a bad thing. Like right now in Sudan, there are at least 3 official processes going. There's one, the US and Saudi Arabia has an African Union one, there's a UN one, and Egypt and some others are animating work there. Libya has taken a role. My view is once any of them has found a formula that might begin the transition from war to peace, we'll have to start presumably with some sort of ceasefire between Hemeti and Burhan. Then that becomes the process and everybody else has to follow it. But in this stage where actually nobody knows how to get Burhan and Hemeti to a ceasefire, people are trying different things. Some are trying to put pressure on the United Arab Emirates, which is, playing a role on one side. Some people are trying to work with the Libyans and Chadians to stop a flow of weapons there, which might lead to a military balance. And my view is a certain amount of entrepreneurship is not a bad thing until a viable process is going. And when the viable process is going, then you have to support it for a while. I mean, the UN has a process on Syria that's a total farce. I think, probably not on your podcast, but in other contexts, the people involved in that process would recognize that. So I think if anybody else has anything useful they can do that would save lives or end the suffering of the poor people of Syria, then that's a great thing, UN process or no UN process, which, by the way, Lakhdar Brahimi ran for a while. And the reason he resigned was not because there were so many other mediators doing wonderful things.
Well, actually, that leads me into another related question about Switzerland's role. Switzerland has traditionally played an important role in mediation as a small country with not having historical baggage with it, that is considered neutral. But more recently, and within the context of the Syria talks, where Russia has come out and said that we should no longer hold the talks in Geneva because they say that Switzerland is no longer neutral. It has taken decisions which question that neutrality in the context of the Ukraine-Russia conflict. What do you think, what can Switzerland do to recuperate that image of neutrality? Is it possible now, or once it's damaged goods, can't play that role anymore? Or how do you see that?
I saw a movie recently called Hors Saison, in which somebody said, "Why do you want to go to Switzerland?" And the protagonist says, "Well, it has a great assisted suicide program." So I would say that is greatly underselling it. I would say Switzerland has a lot to offer, among other things, Robert, because it's a hub for people like you and me. And a lot of the mediation we do starts with a humanitarian engagement, or in fact starts with the humanitarian community. I think it's it's public knowledge now that the ICRC played quite a valuable role in getting the talks between the government of Colombia and the FARC going by transporting members of the FARC leadership out of the jungle bases to Havana, where there was a safe space where they could talk. And, Switzerland continues to do amazing things. I know what you're saying about Russia having its doubts about how neutral Switzerland is these days. But, for example, when we were doing the work to get to a national ceasefire on Libya in 2020, The Swiss pulled out all the stops. That was the height of the pandemic. It was a nightmare, not just to get overflight rights for people from unrecognized parts of the country to fly over the airspace of Libya or wherever to come here, but also to figure out all the health requirements and so on. So I think we live in a very fragmented world, and nobody, even Switzerland, can fully escape the claim that that they're not perfectly virginal in their neutrality, but they have a lot to offer. There are other places where negotiations take place these days, the United Arab Emirates, Istanbul, and other places. But Switzerland has a special role, and HD at least is planning on staying here for the long term.
Okay, so it's not damaged goods irreparably.
No.
You mentioned the role of Qatar or the Gulf countries, and we recently had the visit of the Qatari foreign minister here at the Institute. It seems that I was quite surprised to learn their involvement in mediation in diverse countries like Afghanistan, Ukraine, Iran, even as far afield as Venezuela. How do you assess the rising mediation role and success of Gulf countries like Qatar?
Yeah, I mean, they're slightly different. Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, they all have ambitions in the world of negotiations, and they all have some considerable successes. Maybe the thing that unites them is they see themselves as global hubs. And they see themselves as having an interest in a more stable and open world. I think the particular case of Qatar, both in Afghanistan and now in Gaza, is related to the fact that they are hosting, as it were, or at least they are the location of political offices of the belligerent organizations, of the Taliban first, and then of Hamas. But so their case is slightly different, but more or less what unites them is the common thread is this desire to have an open and stable world. They are rising powers, and they have issues among themselves, and there are other issues at play, and as with the traditional mediators, to some extent they play on both sides. The United Arab Emirates is both a mediator, but it's also, supporting the belligerents of one side or another in several conflicts. So,
which is not unlike other countries like the United States, for instance, which is involved
or the United States, and, sort of somewhat farcically has played a role as a third-party mediator between Israel and Palestine, which doesn't make any sense at all. The United Kingdom, has played a mediation role in the context of Yemen, but the United Kingdom is on the side has been on the side of Saudi Arabia.
You talked about carrots and sticks and how they're important. And those countries,
that's right.
If you look at the US and Israel, they've demonstrated, as we've seen in the news today, that they have carrots that they can withhold if...
No, that's right. And I'm not even sure. Neutrality is important for, little pipsqueak organizations like us. Yeah. But I don't think neutrality is even that important for the larger players. What's important is that their interests are aligned with the parties that are trying to get the deal. So the big countries tend not to be very neutral, but it also doesn't matter. The Gulf countries, by the way, generally are. United Arab Emirates, for example, is playing or trying to play a role on some issues between Russia and Ukraine. And, it maintains generally good, more or less equidistant relations with Russia and Ukraine. But the larger...
But like the Libya context, it might be more difficult to argue that.
No, absolutely. And mediators, like all mortal human beings, are not always the most consistent creatures. And a country which might be, quite balanced and equidistant in one context might be absolutely the opposite in another.
Yeah. I read Richard Holbrooke's book about his mediation in the context of the conflict. And he was very clear that, he was using the stick to get Milosevic to agree to a ceasefire and eventually the Dayton Peace Accords. So, you could argue that is really what makes people come to the table and makes them agree. It doesn't necessarily mean the peace is going to hold for long, but at least you can get people sitting around the table then.
Absolutely. That's the classic heavy mediation where the U.S. drafted an agreement and they said, there's good news. If you sign on, you get a huge NATO peacekeeping force to keep it in place. You get the end of the war. You get all these benefits. And if you don't, we're going to bomb you. And that's one way. I mean, I would love it if HD could do that. But sadly, it's not. We don't have our own nuclear deterrent. We don't have many carrots and sticks. But so we have to rely on ideas and finding points of equidistance. So it's tougher. I should say, by the way, that the heavy mediators, led by the US, have their own problems. I'm not sure there's been a Dayton agreement type agreement since Dayton. That was 30 years ago. So, and I would say, in fact, it's not that great an agreement. The type of agreement you get when you wave bombers around is like the sort of good behavior you get with kids when you spank them. Short term seems to work pretty well. Whether it's long term successful is
an imperfect peace agreement, but nonetheless one that kept relative peace.
But there have been hardly any comprehensive peace agreement since then. So I think, in fact, one of the reasons that these alternative forms of mediation have emerged is there haven't been too many Daytons on offer.
Yeah. Okay. Listen, David, I have lots of other questions I'd love to ask you. It's been fascinating talking with you this morning, and I'll have to ask those questions afterwards. But I think we're going to have to end the discussion with David Harland for today. We hope to come back to our listeners soon with another discussion on the practicalities and challenges of mediation and peace building in the modern world. Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.